This short information video is designed to give insight into the considerations that are made when it comes to making an income protection policy claim. My name is Robert Betts, Market Development Manager, and I'll be taking you through this session where we'll be looking at the considerations specifically with regard to how a client's expectations potentially are going to be met, and ultimately their understanding of these policies and the circumstances in which they will receive a successful claim and the payment as expected. What's driven a lot of this is being the consumer duty changes from July 2023, which have really focused the industry on those great outcomes for clients. We're not going to go into the detail of that too much today, but other than just to highlight that consumer understanding, what is it that your client understands they've bought, and do they have a clear, fair, and not a misleading expectation as to what the benefits of the policy are and the circumstances under which that policy benefits can be paid? Because we can't avoid the issue that currently across the industry there has been a rise in the amount of policies that are not quite meeting the criteria, or there's been information that's not been correctly presented when the policies were written, which means that there is some form of either innocent or sometimes even deliberate misrepresentation when the policies are set up. This really focuses the mind on the areas of great concern, which are people's smoking and vaping habits. Are they actually giving us the true picture on the day the policy was taken? With regard to their alcohol consumption, or maybe information or recommendations that have been made with regard to alcohol consumption in the past. Sometimes there are issues around people's BMI and the weight that they're declaring when it comes to these policies being put on risk. Are they telling us the way that they hope to be in the future, maybe, as opposed to the way that they are today? And then when it comes to pre-existing conditions, sometimes conditions are under control and people sort of don't think it's important to tell us about these things, but it can have a bearing on the outcome of that claim if it isn't disclosed. So the message really is to tell us everything as requested, which will then help that client have that understanding that these policies will be paid, and more importantly, why it's important that they tell us these things. There may even be situations where people have got symptoms going on in the background that they're ignoring currently, haven't yet been diagnosed, but potentially manifest themselves in the future and result in a difficult conversation when it comes to establishing whether that claim is valid or not. And then finally, we get into the areas of overestimation of earnings. Sometimes people try and future-proof their cover, i.e. give us a figure that they hope to earn in the future, which means potentially when that claim comes, they haven't actually got there, and they've been overpaying for cover that they never had the opportunity to even make a successful claim on. So as you can see, there's lots of considerations around the claim, but also getting information right at outset is absolutely key to ensuring that those client expectations are met. So if we dive straight into the claims and the basic considerations, maybe we can use some of this information to help our clients understand what will be required from them at point of claim. So firstly, we're going to be looking for the medical information. Is it medically supported? We'll then get into the realms of the finances. Is it financially supported? Was the information correct when the policy was originally proposed? What is the customer's occupation, and how does the incapacity limit them from carrying out their own occupation? That's one of those key considerations as to understanding where that claim will be made versus potentially where maybe people think it would be made. And then has the customer misrepresented in any way? Any medical occupation information gaps, that could mean that that claim is either delayed or potentially even declined, because this isn't the situation any of us want to find ourselves in. What we want is for those clients to actually have the benefit of knowing that that support from the insurer is there to help them through a difficult point in their lives then. So if we go a bit deeper into those 4 areas of claims and the considerations, let's have a look at the medical situation first. Is the claim medically supported? Does the customer have an illness or injury that prevents them from working and doing their own occupation? Are they exaggerating for some reason, maybe unbeknown to us at this point, their circumstances, which may lead to other areas of over-exaggeration of the symptoms? Sometimes there could be other issues at work, which means they don't want to go to work, and this might be the potential, or they see an opportunity to get a bit of time away from the working environment, potentially still have some form of financial security and pay coming in. So we'll be looking at the situation that arises and how that diagnosis or definition meets the criteria for that claim. But the question really is, could the customer work, or is the claim misinformed or potentially even dishonest? Is there a misunderstanding with regard to the situations in which these policies will pay out? We then get into the realms of the finances, i.e., do the figures stack up? Is it financially supported? Does the client have ongoing income? Maybe they've got a business of their own, maybe they're owner director of that business and they still receive dividends. So that income will have a bearing, or that continuing income will have a bearing on the outcome of the claim. Does the customer have also maybe group cover, i.e., does their employer provide them with some form of extended sick pay arrangement? Or maybe they've got their own personal income protection plan elsewhere. So this is all part of the advice process to understand what the situation for that individual would be if they were unable to do their role because of that illness, injury, incapacity, and the diagnosis and the impact on their ability to do that role. Are we looking at maybe even applying the income guarantee? This is where people's earnings fluctuate and have dropped in the future, and maybe the income they have in the months and years leading up to the claim mean that actually they can't claim the full amount, but there is a cushion and a safety net. They actually triggered enough earnings in that period of time to make that claim a success. And at the outset, what we'll be checking for is, did they provide the correct earnings when they took that policy out? Is the customer under or overinsured? And when they took the plan out, was there a likelihood that that claim could have been a success? So the finances are key in ensuring that people have a payment which is in line with their expectations. Other considerations: the occupation assessment. What is their occupation and what are their normal duties? And more importantly, what's preventing them from performing those duties? Sometimes historically people have thought that just because your doctor signs you off sick from work means that ultimately the successful claim can be made. That's not always the situation, and that's just something to bear in mind. There is that test, that assessment to see how the impact of the diagnosis stops you being able to perform the duties of your job. And again, it's bringing that to the client's attention and maybe just making it clear as to the circumstances in when a claim would be paid, especially when it comes to their ability to do their role. And then finally, there's an application review. Is there any misrepresentation, either innocent or deliberate? Have we had accurate disclosure at outset with regard to medical history, lifestyle, occupation, earnings, when that policy was applied for? So again, it's just making sure that we're making the client aware of the scenario and giving them every opportunity to help them make that successful claim in the future. Now, a grey area that often comes up in conversation is these policies do have a benefit payable in the situation for mental ill health. It forms one of the top 3 most frequent claimed for conditions when it comes to income protection policies. Now, not every single mental ill health episode will trigger a successful claim, and I think that's something to be fully aware of. There are 3 specific categories of mental ill health, if we were to sort of give a very sort of generalist overview of them. Category 3 is typically where a diagnosis on its own wouldn't justify an income protection claim being made. This is the sort of ups and downs of normal life, which affect people in different ways, but they're potentially not going to be issues that prevent you from being able to do your job long term, but you might need some specific help as we go through those periods of potentially grief, bereavement, stress at work, situations that come at different times in our lives, but and they're difficult to deal with, and we might need some help with, but they're specifically not probably going to trigger a specific income protection claim with them. So grief, bereavement, stress, these are things we can deal with and we can help the clients with via the support services, but it's not going to potentially trigger that income protection claim. So support services, or Legal & General's wellbeing services, can put courses of treatment and therapies in place to help people through those difficult points in their life. We then move into category 2, which is where we're getting a little bit more serious and where evidence of the condition, severity and frequency will impact, and maybe a decision could be made as to a claim being made, but we need to understand whether this is causing the claimant to be unable to work. This might be situations around panic attacks or anxiety disorders where it's becoming more frequent and more severe, and ultimately it has a detrimental effect on the person's ability to do their job. So category 2 is where we've got the support services available, and maybe even the services of rehabilitation support to help people through these points in their lives. And then we get into category 1, which is where we're probably going to be paying that claim. This is where the evidence of the condition shows that the claimant isn't going to be working as a result of that diagnosis. Just things like bipolar disorder, clinical depression, postnatal depression, psychosis, schizophrenia, things that are very, very severe and do in the main stop people being able to function day to day, and as a result of that being unable to perform the duties of their work and be able to be successful in their day-to-day trials to become and do that occupation as best of their ability. So the claims consideration when it comes to the more serious end, that's where the real support comes in, and where the claims or the expectation of a claim can be expected. So hopefully it gives us a little bit of oversight as to the severity and how mental ill health claims are considered when it comes to your clients. And if we've got that understanding with them at outset, then they'll know the position, or at least they'll have an understanding of when that claim potentially is going to be successfully or considered for a successful claim. As I've already pointed out, there are support mechanisms in place when it comes to mental health support. We have our Legal and General Wellbeing Services, which deals with those day-to-day life-changing events where maybe we've lost a loved one and we're going through grief and bereavement. Maybe we've got issues with relationships which have a bearing on how we go about our lives day-to-day, and there may be access to courses of counselling, if appropriate, for those types of scenarios, to give people the tools to be able to cope with those situations as they arise. As things get a little bit more serious, this is where rehabilitation supports comes in as part of that claim service. In-house clinical teams, they're there to assess the needs of the individual, come up with working on care pathways for those people, and helping them by putting them in touch with some of our specialist partners who can help them through those difficult points and get them on the road to recovery as quickly as possible. So you can see there are lots of considerations, but also there are some really, really valuable additional services that the client would benefit from having some knowledge of as part and parcel of the advice process. So when it comes to claims, there's also a consideration around the deferred periods, i.e. the periods of time before the claims become valid. So some basic knowledge around how these plans work is essential to helping our clients to understand when that claim might become a valid claim and they could expect to receive their money. As you can see on the screen there, with Legal and General, we've got deferred periods somewhere between 4 and 52 weeks. So how do we position that with our clients? What is the client's expectation? So pulling it back into that consumer duty understanding of having a clear, fair and not misleading expectation is key. So sometimes people will look at 4 or 8 week deferred periods because they live in where that money will be needed early if they're unable to work. Maybe they're working hand to mouth and on a weekly or monthly basis, and there's not a lot of cash in reserve to see them through even a couple of months. In those scenarios, quite often the focus will be on those early or those short deferred periods. But what's the client's expectation if they take a 4 week deferred period? Is that when they expect to receive payment, or do they understand that if we've got all the supporting evidence is when that claim becomes valid? Because when a claim becomes valid and when it's paid is slightly different. So again, if we can position that with a client, it will give us the opportunity to meet that consumer understanding and help give that client the opportunity to make the plans they need to see them through that period of time. Now, what this doesn't mean is that they aren't going to get the amount of money owed to them after 4 weeks. It just means that only once all of the evidence is in place and we're satisfied that claim is potentially meeting the criteria, we will then backdate the claim to the valid date of 4 weeks, and we'll pay 4 weeks in arrears of that. So as you can see, it's making sure those clients are aware that it's not possibly as anticipated if we don't explain these things to them. And then sometimes we need to consider again when and for how long those claims would be paid for. Here we've got a situation where maybe a client has taken a policy which will, on claim, after the deferred period, pay all the way through to the end of the policy term. So in this case, for a 25-year policy, the maximum cover would pay, once that claim has been assessed and we've got all of the information, it will pay every month for the duration of the remainder of that term of the policy if that client is unable to return to work and go about their day-to-day occupation. But over 50% of the policies that are bought in the income protection market these days are of the limited benefit payment type. So this is where Legal and General have our low cost version of these plans. They're called low cost because if we limit the benefit payment term, that means that our exposure to risk is reduced and those cost savings are then passed on to the clients. If we have a client maybe with a 2-year benefit payment, so the policy will pay out for 24 months, then the client's expectation potentially needs to be focused on what happens at month 25 onwards. Is this still a good solution for them? We've recommended something based on their needs, but also making it affordable in the sense that we've reduced the cost by limiting that payment for 2 years. Does the client understand that? Are they aware of the limitations of these plans? And does it give you the opportunity to help them come up with a contingency plan to deal with the long-term illness beyond the length of the term that benefit would be paid from their income protection policy? So again, there's considerations to be made in positioning the solution to enable that client to understand what the expectation of that claim might be. Because when will the claim be paid? I've already sort of suggested and hinted that, yeah, just because they have a shorter deferred period doesn't mean specifically that that's when they would get their money. What that really means, though, is that that individual, once the claim has been assessed, can have that money backdated to that deferred period. So if we were to picture or put this into pictorial terms, we can see that in this instance, we're going to have somebody who can't do their occupation. They inform the insurer. Another key point is making sure your clients understand that they should call the insurer as soon as they're off work, as soon as they can't do their role, because they shouldn't be waiting to the end of the deferred period to give us the details and start that claims process. So as soon as we're informed, we can get into action and start helping that client through the next weeks and months as they go through to receiving their money in that claim. So in this instance, we've got an individual who's got an 8-week deferred period. That 8-week deferred period, after it's passed, then the claim becomes valid. If we've got receipt of all of the information required in the claim with regard to the medical situation, the occupation and the finances, and look for all of those things around making sure the disclosure was correct at outset. Once the claim is valid, 4 weeks after that, the claim will be paid in arrears there. So again, the client will get their money backdated to the 8 weeks if we still aren't in receipt of all of that information at that point in time. It will come, but the client needs to understand specifically how and when it will be paid. After the deferred period, then the claim will commence, and we'll keep tabs on the client to ensure that their health is as good as it can be, and that we're getting them back to as good a health as possible. But the claim will continue to pay for as long a period as they're unable to do their occupation. And of course, supporting every step of the way, we've got the wellbeing support as part and parcel of positioning the features of the plan and the benefits of it to help that client through that difficult point. If they get to the point of making the claim, rehabilitation services will swing into action to help that client again through those difficult weeks and months as they're going through the dealing with the impact of their illness, injury or incapacity, and putting interventions in place and plans to help that client get better as soon as possible. And it could also be supported by things like additional benefits such as fracture cover. If your client breaks a leg and they have a manual occupation, potentially a payment from a fracture cover plan could help plug the gap during that deferred period when maybe the client needs the additional support of extra money to see them through the short term until the claim kicks into play there. So as you can see, there's features and benefits of the policies if they're positioned well with the client and really enhance that claims experience for that client. And another feature is to think about the appropriate levels of cover. As we said, we test the finances at point of claim. If somebody's employed, typically they have steady and plannable earnings, and that means that we can head towards maybe going for maximum cover if that's appropriate for the client, or maybe in a sum that's going to cover the outgoings that they or their family are exposed to. That'll have a bearing on the cost and actually how much of their earnings they're prepared or need to cover in order to successfully stay in the home, pay the mortgage, keep the bills paid, to allow them to get back to work at a good pace that's going to enhance and help their health in the future. If you've got clients who are self-employed, we're dealing with fluctuating income sometimes, good years and bad years. So do we go for the maximum cover in the year that we propose to plan, or maybe to cover the outgoings? Are we confident that their earnings are going to trigger a claim as expected for the level of cover they've been paying for throughout the term of the plan? So it's a great way of actually trying to have a conversation with your client in order to ensure that the outcome of claim is as successful as possible. So understand who the client is, how they earn the money, and some of the nuances of the way in which they're paid and the areas in which those considerations can be made for the future. We've got some useful documents at Legal & General. Our Plan Ahead PDF, you can download it from the Advisor Centre, allows us to test maybe how much cover or what insurances or what monies your client might receive if they're in for an employed nature. It's called Plan Ahead. It deals with, do you really know your employer benefits? And the questions it asks helps the client to self-research their own situation, so that when we're having a conversation with them, you're able to position the right amount of benefit. But at point of claim, they'll know that maybe they've got sick pay for a certain amount of weeks at a certain amount of their proportion of earnings. But the most sort of important question as part of positioning this with your clients is, once they've self-researched their own financial situation in the event of sickness, the big question is it enough? Which potentially is the permission to then start looking at the various income protection solutions to work and dovetail with the existing covers they have. Assuming we've got all of the information together and the client's going to be making a successful claim because they know what the process is and they have an expectation of what evidence is going to be required, a claim, it should make that claims process a simple transactional piece of correspondence. We need a letter from the doctor to understand why they can't, what it is there, or the diagnosis is, and why they are unable to do their role. We need evidence of earnings. If they're employed, it will be the previous 12 months earnings, or if they're self-employed, we'll look at an average of the last 3 years. There's electronic submission available with Legal & General for that information. And then once the information is received, every client making a claim receives the services of a dedicated claims handler who will work with them individually as they go through that claim, and the ongoing management of that claim as well. So hopefully it's given you insight to some of the considerations that are needed when it comes to this type of cover. And to support that, we do have various tools and calculators at Legal & General. We've got deadline to breadline to help sort of demonstrate the amount of time your clients would survive on their current sick pay or their current savings, and it allows you to then work with them with regard to that deferred period. BMI rating to look at the height and weight ratios, the application, risk reality calculators to help us position why we're having a conversation about a certain protection solution with a client in a certain order. Income protection benefit calculator that allows you to position the maximum covers for the client, and it then helps you to dovetail those step benefits that work with covers they may have, or with group schemes or other ongoing incomes. And then finally, you've got the executive income protection calculator, which is aimed at positioning protection with the clients who may have their own small limited companies, and they're deciding how best to pay for the cover, either from a personal policy or via one paid for by their business. But if we can get the calculations and position the risk with the client and help them understand that process, it then potentially gives us the opportunity to be able to work with them and help them understand how better to make that claim, and some of the questions that will be asked at the point when, unfortunately, things have taken the turn from the worst with their health, but it means also that they're unable to go to work and do their role, which means that that claim hopefully can be successfully made. So that's the income protection insights, and hopefully those claims considerations are now a little bit clearer and will allow you to position your services, but more importantly, the questions you ask with your client, and focus on the importance of getting it right at outset to enable that claim to be as successful as possible in the future.